For 5 years, I came to work every day to this building as an Air Force industry contractor. Each day, I had the privilege of seeing this Air Force Memorial replica before entering. The original Air Force Memorial overlooks the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. This one is on Pentagon Boulevard in Beaver Creek, Ohio, a few miles from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. The Air Force Memorial honors the pioneers of early flight, like the Wright brothers, but also the personnel of the United States Air Force. Seeing this every day was a constant inspiration to me and those of us working on that Air Force project. This next panel discusses the impact of cybersecurity across industries. I hope you enjoy it.
Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Don Bowen, Cybersecurity Outreach Director for Huntington National Bank. I'm joined on today's panel by Major General Mark Bartman, Lou Lyons, Max Aulick, and Christopher Zell. I'd ask each of them to introduce themselves after their first question, and we'll dive right into the questions now. Max, can you please talk to us about why cybersecurity is important in product and technology development?
Sure, absolutely. So, Don, first of all, thank you so much for, I want to thank everybody on this panel for being here with me. Just a little bit about my background. So I started my career in the Air Force as a security forces member, spent majority of my time in Iraq and Afghanistan, joined right after 9/11 and then got sent over there, spent time as a linguist. Came back and actually started working here at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So I'm pretty excited to be part of this panel, considering all the history and a lot of my friends are out at Wright-Patterson. And then I immediately started working on Ignite. So today we are leading and developing a product, which this is a good question for next generation leaders in corporate environments, right? Financial services, healthcare, those kinds of things. So the question is, why is cybersecurity important in product or technology development? The way I look at it is cybersecurity is a culmination of finance, legal, and technology, right? That's what makes up the whole concept of cybersecurity or risk management. We have to start baking in cybersecurity considerations at the start of the requirements lifecycle and at the start of when you even start to conceptualize about what a product should be. Because at the end of the day, we all rely on products and services, and a lot of our critical infrastructure, whether it's on the Air Force side or the commercial side, we're using one form of a product or another. So it's very critical to have some of these things, cybersecurity, as part of that life cycle. I'm going to pause here. I'm sure General Mark has some comments about this as well. But all in all, in the summary, I think it's a very important part of cybersecurity because a lot of the vulnerabilities and issues are actually found in some of the most cutting edge products that we hear about. So we have to build a little bit more awareness about why this should be considered as part of the technology development.
Thanks, Max. Appreciate the handoff. Don, thanks for being the gracious host to try to corral all of us today. I appreciate that. I'd like to just a quick shout out to the Wright IT Summit that today for all the great things I know that and also the Dayton-Wright chapter, the Armed Forces Communication Electronics Association. They've got their 75th anniversary coming up next year. So been around for actually longer than the United States Air Force has been around. So pretty impressive organization. As Max started out talking about there, I'll just real quickly a little bit on my background for everybody. I actually graduated from Ohio State University back in 1982, so about a million years ago. And I spent most of my career actually as a fighter pilot. And so I'm sure your first thought is, so what on earth is a fighter pilot doing on end of a panel? Well, the last 8 years actually of my career was probably the most formative when it comes to understanding cybersecurity and industry and how this all comes together. I was initially the commander for the Air National Guard here in Ohio, and then the last 4 years worked for Governor Kasich as the Adjutant General for the state of Ohio. And It was back actually in 2015 when the governor came to me and said, we need to figure out this cybersecurity thing. We need to make sure that our elections are secure, and I want you to do it. And again, my reaction, of course, at the time, in many ways, was, yes, sir, I'll get right on it. And so I immediately went back and sat down and started talking to all of my experts within both the Army and the Air National Guard to try to understand better what it was really that we need to be doing. And I think it really boils down to one word, and the word we use is trust. So, for a industry and you're selling a product and you are hoping that somebody is going to buy your product, the first thing that you should be thinking about is that the customer is going to trust that your product is going to work, number one. And then number two, that it will keep their information secure. So, and obviously, as we all know, there's been many large hacks of information over the last 10 years in particular. Me being in the military, obviously, it's been unfortunate, but I've been a part of several of those large data. And so if the first thing that goes is trust when it comes to product development and technology development, then obviously you're not going to be able to sell your product. You're not going to have people that are going to want to buy your product, and you're not going to be a very successful industry for the long run. So I think that's really one of the key areas for that. And although I don't think we're really going to get into it today, but having the C-suite understand exactly what it is and why cybersecurity is important is critical as well. If your CISO and Chris L, I'm sure at some point will talk about this, but if your CISO doesn't have a direct line to the CEO to be able to walk into the office and say, hey, boss, this is what's going on here, we need to take care of it right away, then the industry has got a problem, and it probably is not going to survive very long. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Don.
Thanks, Mark. Lou, this next one goes to you. In what innovative ways do companies inculcate good cyber hygiene practices into their workforce?
I'm Lou Lyons. I'm the founder and CEO of Shadow Rabbit Cyber. Also a retired Air Force working in electronic warfare and airborne electronic warfare. When I look at hygiene, there's so many different pieces to hygiene. One I would focus on would be education. So when you look at education, there's multiple pieces. Fitting it into your environment is the best way to do it. I've done where we've done annual training. We've done training as newcomers came in, done pop-ups on your laptop, sending out emails, walking around, even had my people stand at the doors when people came in and passed out little crossword puzzles. And if you turned it in and completed it, you get a $50 gift card. But keeping the people involved is the way to do it, and keep it on their mind as you go through. Back to you, Don.
Thanks, Lou. Mark, can you talk to us a little bit about the importance of the supply chain in cybersecurity?
Yeah, I would love to, actually. So one of the things that I've been doing since I retired in January of 2019 is I work at Ohio State University as a consultant. And initially, what I got involved with was to stand up a academic program at Ohio State because they didn't have one specifically focused in cybersecurity. They, of course, have a computer science and electrical and computer engineering degrees, industrial systems type degrees, but nothing that was really focused specifically on cybersecurity or brought all of those different disciplines together into one area. So for students that are interested in getting bachelor's or higher level type degrees in cybersecurity, it was something that they could study. So one of the things that I started to work on was to try to understand better how the supply chain actually works and where are the key areas within the supply chain that we sort of really need to start when it comes to cybersecurity. One of the things that I was able to find was that it really starts, and again, this is fighter pilot speak, right? So it really sort of starts with the ones and zeros, right? So it's not about just writing code and making sure that the code is secure, but it's also about the manufacturing of the integrated circuits, of the chips on the circuit boards. It's making sure, again, right, it goes back to that whole idea of trust. It's making sure that anything that is used, whether it's within the military or whether it's in the civilian sector, has that level of trust to it to make sure that it's going to work like it's supposed to work, right? So it doesn't matter whether, we're talking about your refrigerator at home, which is now part of the Internet of Things, and knowing whether or not, obviously, somebody is spying on your refrigerator and you're low on milk, or whether it has to do with me flying, an F-16 and knowing that when I hit the weapons release button, that bomb that I'm dropping is going to hit what I'm aiming at, that I know it's going to, or that it's even going to come off the airplane correctly, and that it's going to fly the proper path to get to the target on the ground for that. And it's everything really in between, right? So the issue is so broad that it really goes to all different types of areas within the supply chain. So you have to start not only at the beginning, but you have to now address everything that's currently out there and how do we secure what is already out there and making sure that we don't have to worry about any of these kind of hacks in the future time. Don, back to you.
Thanks, Mark. That's a great lead into our next question. Lou, this one's from you. Why should or shouldn't operational technology, or as Mark mentioned, the Internet of Things, and information technology be integrated into one platform?
Please integrate them. Some of the issues I run into, though, is the different languages that are taught. I've went into businesses, and basically IT and OT were at odds with each other. They didn't want to deal with each other. I had to bring in actual outside people and basically translate what was going on and educate the OT staff on what we were trying to do, and then educate the IT staff on how to do it. A lot of times there's a huge disconnect on what you can do. You can't just shove the widget in from IT into the OT environment. All you're going to do is break things. And they're highly sensitive to that because it's happened over and over again. Back to you, Don.
Thanks. Chris, we'll start off with you on this one. Why should industry be involved in training and education programs?
Yeah, thanks, Don. So just to kind of give a quick background on myself, I'm currently Vice President and Head of Information Security for the Wendy's Company. Yes, we're a burger company, but make no mistake, we are truly a digital and technology company. I've got responsibility for almost 7,000 restaurants around the world and over 11 million digital customers, so a lot of data to protect. Spent 22 years in the Air Force, retired about 2 years ago. Spent about 12 years on active duty, and I split the rest of the time between Guard and reserves. So, great question. Why should industry be involved kind of in the training, workforce development? I think about, being able to give our industry a more common baseline of knowledge, skills, and abilities can really help both candidates and employers like me really be much more successful in filling openings. Everyone hears on the civilian side that there's this lack of cyber talent, lack of positions, or candidates who are able to fill open positions. I think in my experience on the civilian side, it's really that we're pretty horrible at creating good job descriptions. I think that's one part of it. I think the second part of it is we've never aligned on a really standard taxonomy, jargon, lexicon, whatever you want to call it, on what we look for in cyber. Right, and so that gives employers a hard time understanding how to create good job descriptions, which then leads to, candidates trying to understand, how do I fit in? If you look at, something like the NICE framework, I'm actually seeing more civilian CISOs on our side starting to align like our job descriptions, creating workforce development training programs in alignment with those frameworks. I think it just allows a lot of the interoperability to occur. It allows for, again, candidates to understand, what roles out there could really fit me and how can I help benefit organizations. And I think as industry, we know what we're doing as, kind of the boots on the ground, trying to defend the domain, so to speak, on a daily basis. And so how can we work more closely together with the government side to really understand how we can bring great candidates to the field that we need?
Great. Lou, do you want to have anything you want to chime in on that same question?
Yeah, I think you need the input from the industry as you're developing these frameworks and you're looking at the training. You have to have some input to gear the training towards what's effective. I've sat through 45-minute sessions of training that put me to sleep, and 5 minutes of it actually had something to do with what I was doing. So you want that input to make sure that you cater the training, make it effective, make it relevant, and make it real. I mean, make it to today. What are you doing today? I've been places where part of the training was I'd walk through the parking lot and I'd drop thumb drives to see who would plug them in after we just got through with a lesson of not to plug in thumb drives. Same things with emails. You need to make it relevant with what's going on. You don't want to send out something that was from 10 years ago, an email message for phishing. You want to send something that's happening in the world right now. Is it the holidays? Are we phishing for the holidays? Are we phishing because somebody just got compromised? Your credit information is available now. So that's the type of phishing we should be doing, but make sure the training and get the input from the industry to specific to what they would be doing and the types of emails they would get or the types of training they're interested in. Thank you, Don.
Thanks, Lou. Chris, this one, let's talk a little bit about diversity in the cybersecurity workforce. First of all, I'd kind of ask you, what does diversity mean to you in the cybersecurity workforce? But how can we increase that diversity?
Yeah, great question. Certainly something I'm quite passionate about and can talk about for a long time. So we'll have to time box this a little bit. Diversity to me, and this may not be reflective of what, if we have a primarily kind of government-based attendance here, but to me, and kind of in our industry, anyone that doesn't really look like me, right? I mean, I'm talking about women. I'm talking about LGBTQ. We're talking about Latino, Latinx. We're talking about even differently abled folks. So neuro-abled, folks on the autism spectrum, and of course, disabled veterans. So my wife, a great example. She's a woman in cyber, and things have kind of been tough for her on occasion. So diversity is important to me, I think, for a few reasons. Obviously, one, on the personal side, something very passionate about. But then also, when you bring diverse backgrounds, when you bring diversity of thought, diverse ideas to problems, you can then solve them in ways that you would not have been able to solve for before. I think traditionally in technology, we're used to looking at the same problems the same way. We've hired the same type of people, and we keep getting the same type of results. So I think really being able to bring a divergent thought to all of your processes, I think of it as kind of red teaming in your organization, right? The idea is to bring in someone with a contrarian view, dissimilar backgrounds, but still has a capacity and a propensity for deep thought, analytics, drive, motivation. I've just seen amazing results bringing folks in from non-traditional backgrounds who are able to look at problems so much differently. But I think also as an industry, we as practitioners should reflect the audience, so to speak, that we actually support. So for Wendy's, for example, obviously we're a very large service organization, and I want our corporate entity to reflect the same values and workforce of the people that we actually provide services to. So whether it's your customers, your employees, or the American people, I think really, ultimately the community as a whole should really reflect those who we actually intend to protect. I think that also helps us understand who they are and how we can better support those folks. I think a kind of a dovetail to that is, how do we get people more involved into cybersecurity? How do we get more people excited from those diverse backgrounds? I think it's a few things. I think we really need to focus on getting kids more excited about cybersecurity, right? So middle school, high school, STEM fields, and General Bartman kind of touched on it a little bit. There's this paradigm out there that to be involved in cybersecurity, I think, from what I've seen, you have to be a programmer, computer science, math whiz, or it's all about being a hacker in a hoodie. And that's just not true. And I know for a fact a lot of those paradigms really turn a lot of folks off from our industry. So I think it's incumbent on us who are actually involved to get that message out there that, look, there are so many different career paths in cybersecurity that don't require a deep technical understanding. I run a global team of 90 people, and I've only got one team that's made of ethical hackers. There's about 6 folks, just as an example. Not everyone knows programming languages. So there are a lot of different career paths. And so to get in front of those people and help them understand, look, this is a very rewarding career field, both financially, personally rewarding. You can work almost anywhere. Financially, you can be set up to be very successful. So yeah, just a topic, again, we could go on and on, but a lot of great initiatives out there that are underway to help increase diversity and inclusion and equity in the cyber field, and I'm proud to be involved in a few of them. So
thanks, Chris. This one I'm going to get input from all 4 of our panelists. Given their experience, and I know each one of them, so I know they are successful in their current cybersecurity careers, but really, how has that experience that they achieved during the military parts of their career, how has that really transitioned over to help them in that leadership in the civilian cybersecurity side of things? So we'll start off with Mark.
Thanks, Don. I appreciate it, and I appreciate you being very generous, saying that I have a cybersecurity career. I'm not exactly sure that that fits what I'm currently doing, but I appreciate it very much, believe me. If I could, what I think would be the best way to address this is actually to touch on the 2 previous questions very briefly. So the first one a couple ago talked about having training programs and the right kind of education training for cybersecurity, and NIST and NICE obviously being ones that the federal government highlights the most. And so as an example, when I started out at Ohio State, one of the first things that I realized talking to a lot of the faculty members, and I have to be a little careful here because my wife is a professor and I don't want to get in too much trouble here at home, is the this issue of that in academia and higher ed particularly, right? There doesn't appear to be a lot of interaction between industry and academia. And so you tend to get these diverging paths where academia feels that, well, we're teaching the right things. These are the things that the students need to know. But in fact, that may not actually be what industry wants. And so one of the first things that I did was I brought together a panel. And in fact, both Don and Chris were 2 of the individuals that were on the panel. And we sat down with about a half a dozen faculty members and spent about 3 or 4 hours one Friday afternoon going through each and letting everybody kind of talk around the table to try to figure out what it was really that was being taught and then what it was that industry really needed. So that's really, I think, one of the key areas here is that to make sure that academia is listening to industry and it's going both ways, right? The second point is this diversity issue, and Chris is absolutely right on target with that. I will just say that 38 years in the military, that many, many, many times I saw what I would consider to be groupthink. And usually that is because you have individuals that have similar backgrounds. They don't even have to look alike necessarily, but if their backgrounds are all the same, you end up with everybody having very similar type of thinking processes towards whatever the problem is that is presented to you. And so when it comes to, especially within cybersecurity, right, and you've got somebody attacking your network out there, you don't know who that person is. So having people on your team with diverse backgrounds, with different of approaching a problem, with different ways of thinking about a problem is going to make your business much more successful in the long run, just in my opinion. So I think, I sort of answered the question in a roundabout way. And I'll finish with maybe just saying that I kind of think of myself as a cybersecurity evangelist. One of the things that I did while I was the Adjutant General was to start what we call the Ohio Cyber Collaboration Committee. And that was an attempt, and it's very successful now, to just bring together as many different people from across the state of Ohio that we could to sit at the table and talk about issues. What do we need to do? We now have an Ohio Cyber Range that is fully up and running, hosted by the Ohio Cyber Range Institute at the University of Cincinnati. We now have an Ohio Cyber Reserve that the National Guard is responsible for, and they've already stood up several teams with that. So there's a lot of great things that have happened just in the last few years. And I like to think that it's been those experiences that I had in the military that have really helped me to better think through and to be able to plan out as to how I was going to address some of these problems. So, Chris, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mark. For me, and being at Wendy's, I actually have the great pleasure of chairing one of our employee resource groups is focused on veterans. So I lead the Wendy's Veteran Employee Resource Group. And there are really three things that we talk about when we like to evangelize, what being a veteran means and why hiring veterans is important. And I usually touch on training, resilience, and leadership. From a training perspective, in my 22 years as an airman, I was really afforded some of the best training in the world, actually. And I remember being a one-striper, back in the mid-90s and being sent up to Seattle to learn things like, packet capture and analysis. And I was banging on my first Cisco, routers and switches as a 20-some-year-old kid. I think being able to install and operate some of the first firewalls in the Air Force and some of the first vulnerability scanners, really gave me a really deep understanding of what cyber and technology is. So we talk about the training. Resilience, I think, most everyone here can really relate to this, but deployments being away from home, dealing with high ops tempo, working in austere conditions, and really having high levels of responsibility thrust upon you at an early age, I think really sets you up to be able to look at things through a different lens when you enter the civilian workforce. So I think no matter how long you spend, you served or will serve on active duty or in the military at all, I think spending any amount of time will really help make what you deal with on the civilian side sometimes feel like a bit of a cakewalk, actually. And I think from a leadership perspective, where we're thrust into leadership at early age, as I mentioned, it's not really that way in the civilian sector. We are groomed through professional military education. We have real work experience. We're groomed as servant leaders who really put our people and our mission first. And that's a quality that's very highly sought after on the civilian side. I think we're trained to speak very well, to carry ourselves a certain way, dignity, respect, and trained to take care of our people and of course reflect the core values of each of our services every day. So I think taking all of those components that have really forged, I know everyone on this panel, myself as well, into who we are today has really helped us to be very successful in transition, into the civilian side of things. So.
Thanks, Chris. We'll go to Max next.
Sure. So, I started my career in the Air Force right out of high school. So before that, I had migrated from India and had recently just gotten my citizenship. So to me, what the most important thing that the military brought is a sense of purpose, and it fits perfectly within cybersecurity because it's not just about configuring a vulnerability tool, writing an executive presentation, whatever it might be. We're really here to help protect and serve, right? And then when we translate that into a civilian side, that's really what the mission is. The mission is to serve. The mission is to help protect businesses. I like Chris said, very early days, you receive the best training in the world, right? I was configuring things like TAC lanes and loading up crypto equipment, things like that. At that time, I didn't really understand why, what I was doing, but I knew how to do it. And so that helped. Being an enlisted guy, there's a common saying, hey, just shut up and color, right? So I followed suit. But eventually, when I got over into the civilian side, I missed my veteran friends, right? And then what we really learned is we all had a sense of purpose. And the purpose was to actually help protect and defend our country. And now with the third-party supply chain issue, it all impacts directly back to our national security reasons. And to me, it just makes the job a much more sweeter, right? Whether we're in leadership capacities, which I am today, but in the past, I haven't been in the leadership capacities. And it still made the job much more sweeter, because our goal is really to help our nation and the supply chain and all the civilians that are working within different corporate environment. Believe it or not, they're an extension of the force of the entire country. So to me, military actually set my path pretty early on in my career, and I'm actually blessed to have that experience. So what I'll say is, if you are young and you're looking to get into it, I got in what was called a three papa. It was a security forces person. Today, the career has transitioned to 3 Charlie with communications. There's also 3 Delta cyber guys. If you can't afford to actually go to cybersecurity school, military is an excellent option. Me as a foreigner, that I had an awesome veteran, kind of a mentor. He was a chief in the Air Force. He said, "Max, you need to serve your new country." I said, "Yes, sir. I'll go do it." And I didn't know what I was getting into. So it totally prepares you for what's coming up in the future. In the civilian side, the skills are highly sought after. Everything that you learned, there is a little bit of a translation, but that's okay. Once you get past that, you'll climb up the ranks very quickly. So with that, I'll pass it over to Lou. Lou, I know you're a prior guy too. What are your thoughts?
Well, don't tell anybody, but I was a horrible leader to begin with. What the Air Force gave me was mentors to help me basically straighten myself out. I was a dictator. But they helped me see that the importance of your people and the importance of taking care of them and basically guiding them and mentoring them, which was what the Air Force did for me. The senior people I worked for, they basically led me through and showed me how to do things and basically straightened me out from the beginning. Just love being in the Air Force, love the camaraderie. Miss it a lot of times. Being in corporate world in the Air Force, when you're in Air Force, you have policies, regulations that show you how to do things. A lot of times in the commercial world, you're shooting from the hip. It's your decision, and basically it's your head if you don't do it right. But yeah, it's just the different aspects of leadership and the different aspects of training and making sure you're educated and making sure you have the tools to do your job, which I've tried to bring over and have into the corporate environment. Back to you, Don.
Thanks, Lou. So since we've talked a little bit about how your military careers kind of help set you up for success on the civilian side, I'd like to compare and contrast a little bit the key differences in approach to cybersecurity specifically when comparing, how the military organizations and how civilian organizations approach it. So with that, Max, you want to give us a little bit about that?
Sure. So, when I first got out of the Air Force, let me start there. The Air Force, it's almost like when you speak in Air Force lingo, you have to say in accordance with AFI. That's how you can do things, right? If it doesn't exist in the AFI, then it's really hard to make a case to do anything cybersecurity. I remember I was doing these things called DITSCAP packages and DICAP packages, and then trying to get the base firewall approved for some website, right? You always had to have a reason, and it was very much behind a rigorous process. Today, we call this kind of a compliance-driven process. And it was good for its purpose, its time. And then when I went over to the civilian side, it's quite the opposite. There are no rules. Just like Lou said, you're shooting from the hip. So if you start to present it in that way, it doesn't work. The model breaks out, right? So what the commercial side demands is speed. And the speed has to be taken into consideration with financial performance of the business, right? You can't just spend money on compliance. You can't just spend money on the Air Force side, what we call ATOs, right? Approval to operate, unless there's a financial need to do so, right? At a very large scale, right? So when you have organizations like Dell and Google, they're all competing. At the end of the day, they're all financially competing for talent and as well as innovation, right? So one of the biggest things about the civilian side is you're there to augment the innovation, right? At the speed that the business needs to move. Whereas on the military side, our culture is very much risk-centric, risk-averse, where we don't want to make moves. We don't want to go things forward. And so when I was trying to work things between cross agencies, let's say, an Army got something approved and now I'm trying to get it approved by but by the Air Force, interdepartmental, interagency things were very difficult. Whereas on the commercial side, if you don't have interdepartmental communication, you don't have global communication enabled very quick, lightning fast, your competition is going to eat your lunch, right? And so once I understood that, right, what we started to do, at least in Ignite, is we started to build on this concept of agile cybersecurity. How do we feed cybersecurity solutions at the speed that it's required? And that's a very different way of looking at things, right? Where you're really looking at it from a risk and financial speeds perspective versus the compliance and the burden that you have to manage on the Air Force side. So at least that was my experience 10 years ago. I am hopeful that the Air Force is changing. I have heard that the government is changing, but that was the biggest black and white difference from my time. Chris, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that you're going to hear too terribly much different. You're bringing back some memories for me. I was a contractor working for the USF at NOSC at Shaw, and I was leading the policies research section for the information assurance unit. So, DITSCAP, now the RMF, trying to work through the ATOs and various DAAs for, all the different units downrange. It was a bit of a mess, right? And I think my experiences in the military really highlighted a few key differences. But let me talk about the commonalities. Firewalls are firewalls, endpoints are endpoints, Microsoft is Microsoft. I think the big differences I found is really risk appetite, right? And Max alluded to this a little bit. On the military side, you typically have much less tolerance for risk for obvious reasons. I was able to work for an intelligence unit at Ramstein, where risk not tolerated, right? I mean, you certainly have the capability to risk the potential loss of life, limb, eyesight. We say that all the time. We don't see that on the civilian side. Military side, very heavily dependent on processes, right? And for the seasoned folks like Max and I, even going back to the DITSCAP, even before DIACAP, very slow, very cumbersome, very process oriented and driven, right? I know on the civilian side, we don't necessarily deal with the same type of risk. There certainly is financial implications involved in everything that we do. Much to Max's point, that's one of the main reasons why we're here, even in a burger company like I have. If we weren't faced with potential loss of customer sentiment, availability of our point of sale systems due to ransomware, fines and penalties for not protecting credit card information, those are all financially motivated, financially driven risks. That's the primary reason why we're here. And I think another key difference is cultivating a culture of accepting failure. On the military and government side, it's not really there. And again, I think that goes back to the speed that Max mentioned. On the corporate side, we have this culture where we are much more accepting of failure. But I like to say fail fast and fail forward, because we are competing with other folks in the industry. And while we're doing a much better job and making sure that we're embedding and integrating security into our application development pipeline, DevOps, DevSecOps, and the Air Force is spending more time on DevSecOps as well, it is acceptable for us to be able to make some mistakes and to be able to address those after the fact. So I think some failure is required to continue to innovate. If you don't have that culture where it's okay to fail fast and forward, you're not going to get creativity. You're not going to get innovation. You're going to get engineers and ideas that are really built around the idea of going slow, stable, steady, which might be fine in some circumstances. But again, to even what Lou said, shooting from the hip, there's a lot of that. We don't necessarily have Big Brother to go to. We don't have a MAGCOM to go to. We don't have another DAA to lean on for reciprocity. So a lot of these things are on us. I report all of our information directly to the CEO and the board. There's no one else necessarily for me to go to say, hey, how should I be doing this? So a lot of it is kind of building the ship down going down the river as you go. So.
Thanks, Chris. Let's play on that just a little bit and have Max and then Mark really talk to the point at which, what approaches have they seen really that the DoD and Air Force can leverage from the private or the commercial sector side?
Right. To me, it all starts with the acquisition side. The Air Force and the DoD at large, they have to kind of fix their acquisition so they can rapidly onboard different types of capabilities. And so they can attract new talent, right? Because a lot of this has to do with, like Chris mentioned, right? If you have a culture where failure is acceptance, you're going to get a different kind of crowd that wants to innovate because they're not punished, right? So a lot of that has to do with fixing the acquisition. So some of the things that I have seen that work really well on the commercial side is that CISOs like Chris and others that I work with, they have they have actual authority to make decisions when something bad happens, right? So first of all, we need to figure out how do we downward delegate authority, right? I reach out to military folks all the time, and it's just that, hey, I can't sign a single MOU, a memorandum of understanding. I can't do this, I can't do that, right? Because they don't feel like they have the authority. So if you don't feel like you have the authority, you're really not going to innovate. You're really not going to push forward. The second thing is this whole new concept I'm seeing, and it really comes from the civilian side, is this rapid acquisition, right? Whenever there's a problem on the civilian side, Chris can call me up. He can call anybody up and say, "Hey, I need you to fix this," right? That's a form of a rapid acquisition. So OTAs, other transaction authorities, are trying that. So I think that needs to be worked out a little bit more, which essentially is a legislation that allows, as Chris was mentioning, non-traditional players, right? Divergent thinkers, not your traditional, hey, this is how we've always done it, right? They're bringing about new ideas. So to me, a lot of these things on the private sector have already happened, and share practices in this area.
Yeah, it's a really great question, Max. Thanks. So, in fact, yesterday I was listening to Brigadier General Pringle, who happens to be the new AFRL commander, speak, and she was talking about a lot of the things that the Air Force is trying to do right now. And for anybody that's in small business, especially if you're in technology transfer, you're developing technology and you'd like to sell it, or get the Air Force to buy it and use it, or the Department of Defense, right? The Air Force has stood up a new organization called AFWorks. This summer they did their Agility Prime, which is electronic vertical takeoff and landing type of development to try to, or what they call orbs, to try to better connected with businesses around the country. They've had some new leadership here just recently, and I think they're really trying to be more agile, more open. They're trying to work a little bit more at speed of industry, which for the federal government is generally those terms don't mix. You don't think of the federal government as being agile. And in most cases, you probably don't think of the federal government necessarily as being innovative. But those are the two things really that they're going to have to figure out if the Department of Defense, and particularly the Air Force, really truly wants to do what their national strategy says, right? I mean, they're trying to compete with what they consider to be near peer adversaries. The only way to do that is to be able to be more agile and more innovative in the way you think, the way that you address the problems. And in particular, when it comes to things like cyber, right? It's you have to have that. I'll go back to that diversity of thought. You have to have those kind of people working for you, and you have to give them the freedom really to be able to do those kinds of things. When you think of the culture that permeate the different services, one of the things that we sort of used to joke about in the Air Force was that if it wasn't written in the regulation or the AFI, then you couldn't do it. Within the Navy, they kind of looked at it like if it, didn't say that you couldn't do it, then you probably could do it. Those were two different types of thought processes. And I'm not necessarily saying that either one of them is right or either one of them is wrong. But I think in this particular case is that the DoD and the Air Force in particular, they have to be able to adapt some of the way that the commercial sector operates. They have to be able to be willing to take those risks, to take those and do some unique things. There's been a lot of talk over the last couple of years within the Air Force of bringing in people that are experts in certain particular areas and bringing them in, at a fair rank as high as colonel, to be able to run programs within the Air Force that they don't otherwise have the talent or don't have the time or the ability really to develop that kind of talent. So those are kind of, I think, novel and innovative potential approaches that DoD really needs to think about and needs to further develop if they're going to truly compete at the global level. And there's no question about it. And Chris alluded to it, right? He said that he has a global team. Industry and the things that are going on, that affect the United States are global. And you have to be able to think at that level and be able to work at that level. And so it definitely takes everybody to be able to do that. So Don, back to you.
Thanks, Mark. So we're getting short on time here, so we're going to go through a quick closing round, a lightning round of closing statements from our panelists. Lou, over to you first.
So I guess one thing if I wanted to highlight would be ITOT. You need to sit down and understand OT before you can implement security into it. Basically, if not, you're going to shut down everything. So you need to build that relationship and the trust that you're not out to just, check a box on your security checklist and make sure everything's going. So,
Thanks, Lou. Mark?
So first of all, I'll just say thank you again to everybody that put this together for in a really great program, and thanking all of my panel mates here for giving up their precious time from their businesses to be able to do this. I think I'll just add, a quick one of that the Department of Defense and the Air Force, they just really need to, and this is an incredibly overused term, but I'll say it anyways, right? They need to be able to think more outside the box. They really need to be able to figure out ways to be agile and to be innovative. And that may require some significant change to some of the rules that the federal government currently operates under, but they need to work with Congress and they need to try to get those things done. Thanks again.
Thanks, Mark. Max?
Yes, I would second that. Just thank you everyone for my panelists here, and also would love to take any questions afterward. But I agree with Mark. In order for our country to do better, in order to enter into this, I'm calling it the era of innovation within defense, we have to lower the barrier to entry. In order to lower the barrier to entry, we have to delegate authority so we can actually get new kind of thinkers, people that like to fail forward, fail fast. And all that takes is a congressional power. We have to change the rules because we operate under legislative frameworks that are very constraining when it comes to being a cyber professional. There's a lot of, no, you can't do this. No, you can't do that, right? And so we have to figure out how do we match close to the speed of the commercial side by allowing some of those things in, right? So that would be my closing remarks, but would love to take any questions afterwards. And I think I'll pass it over to Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Max. I think, just like everyone else, I want to thank all the organizers of this panel to share some of our experiences and thoughts. And I think my remark is really to anyone who's watching this or listening who is about to transition or will be transitioning to where we are, in the short to mid-term. My time in the Air Force really afforded me with the best experiences of my life, and I wouldn't be where I am today without it. So for those of you who are hoping to be where some of us are, join us soon. Keep learning everything you can, right? Enjoy your experiences. Get your training while you're there. Get your college while you're there. And keep an open mind when you transition. As Mark stated, we're also facing global enemies, and we don't have all of the answers, right? We don't have all the strict, controls and processes that you may be used to. So just keep an open mind when you come join us, and we'll be ready for you. So thank you.
Thanks, Chris. I want to thank all of our panel members. We are unfortunately out of time, so I don't think we're going to be able to take questions and answers, but I'm sure each one of my panelists here would be happy to take them offline. Thank you very much.